My name is Scott Brackett, and I do sort of synth videos and how-to videos on different things. I'm very much a Yamaha enthusiast, and occasionally I do paid work for them, but today is not one of those days. Today, I am doing a quick tutorial on how to use Cubasis running on an old iPad mini. I think this one is on iOS 9, so at time of filming, Cubasis 2.7 will run on even older devices like this, which you can get pretty cheap. And because the iOS integration is super tight, all I have to do is connect via lightning cable to the MODX, and then I can sort of have the two communicate with each other, both audio and MIDI. So without further ado, let's get into how you do this. Okay, so my camera's not all that high res, but I'll be also sort of audio describing as I go through these menus. So even if you can't exactly read what's on either of these screens, you should be able to follow along when it comes time to do this for yourself. Just to sort of talk about my setup real quick, I think I mentioned in the intro, but I am using a camera kit connected via the USB cable to the MODX, and it's just a standard USB cable, not the micro or the mini. I forget what we call the other one. I think it's USB A or USB B. But it's a standard USB cable that would connect to the camera kit. And then I've got the newer Apple adapter. That way I can supply power at the same time, because it's a real bummer to have to worry about whether or not your iPad is charged whenever you want to do this kind of a setup. But what's really nice about this rig is that the MODX will communicate audio and MIDI through USB. So it's pretty much just one cable. Basically, why would you want to do this? I guess the answer, something we may want to get out of the way real quick. For one thing, I really like MIDI sequencing. I think it's a really pleasant way to compose, but it also allows you to do certain things that are very difficult to do in an audio or sample-based workflow. One of those being if you have a part that has a sort of very busy figure at the end of a measure, and then it switches to another section. With audio, I haven't really found a great way to let that to sort of manufacture a nice decay tail for that situation. What ends up happening is there's a sort of a very quick cutoff, and you can add reverb and that sort of thing, and that can help to sort of, if you really wash out the last note on the figure and then let the reverb tail just kind of ring out, that can be good. But it's also really nice to have things dry and a little closer in the mix. And for those situations, I find that either playing it live or recording in more of a linear song format like this is better. And what you can do with a MIDI sequencer is compose in pattern-based mode and then perform it into a DAW or something along those lines. And so it can be really nice to do that, and you can have these sort of sections that there can be like a rising figure at the end of a measure that then decays, and you just get the natural decay of the notes as the next section starts, and there's no discernible cutoff point. So that's sort of one advantage. And then the other thing is you can, if it's in MIDI data, you can swap out instruments for different things later on in the production, or double other instruments very easily. You can achieve that through certain, melody detection software plugins, but I find it's a lot easier to just have the MIDI note data to begin with. So, with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about how I've done this. So the MODX, I believe you can do up to 16 parts, same with the montage. But I've just done 8 for now, because 8 is, for me, kind of a lot of tracks. So I've just got 8 tracks up here with different sounds that sort of all kind of create a palette. I like to sort of do sandbox creation. So I create a palette, and then I, write a whole composition or an entire album just using that sort of limited palette. So in this case, let me see, what have I got? I've got it set so that none of the channels, the little keyboard icon is dark, meaning I can address each of the channels individually just by selecting them. So that's set up that way. So any note that note information just goes to the instrument that I have selected. And the other way you can do that is you can address those by their MIDI channels. I'm not sure if you can change which channels they're routed to, but I just, for the sake of simplicity, I just went ahead and built my palette around the idea that each track would be associated with the MIDI channel that matches its track number. So so that's basically what I have here on the MODX. And the only other change to settings, I believe, is I went to the gear and then pressed the settings button, the gear in the upper right-hand corner, by the way. And from there, I clicked on settings and MIDI I/O, and I changed the MIDI in-out from MIDI to USB. And then I also turned up the volume on the USB volume monitor, which is just to the right of the master volume physical knob. So I'm going to hit the home icon in the upper left-hand corner of the touch screen on the MODX. And now that we're back in this area, we can kind of see the overview of all of the parts that I talked about. So I'm going to scroll up on Cubasis and highlight the first track. And basically, if this were a new track, I would just hit the add a new track down here and then select MIDI on the Cubasis on the iPad. And once that new track loaded, I would select routing. And when these tracks get created, a MIDI track in Cubasis, the default is MIDI out is to nothing. But what you can do is you can change MIDI out from none to MODX port 1, and then you can change the channel from 1 through 16. And so I just went through and created 1 through 16 as my template and assigned the matching channel number to the track that I was in the process of creating. And once that was done, it mapped it pretty much just worked. So if I highlight here and record a part in there and then hit play, it will play. Right here you can see I have a part written in tracks 1 and 2. Let me move the looper. And so you can see I've got MIDI notes. I'll solo just track 1 here. Oh, and the MIDI note stuck because I stopped it in the middle of it. So I'm going to hit stop solo first and then hit play. So notice the bass part's gone. And if I do a little changing of the super knob, add some bit crush, which is in the second insert effects slot of that track instead of the first, because I wanted to have reverb first, and then the reverb tail feeds into the bit crush. So it's pretty much as easy as that. And I guess the other part of it is actually recording tracks into Cubasis. So to record the parts, what I actually did was select the same track as the one that I have armed, in this case track 1, make sure that's highlighted here. And I left local control on so that I can hear the note in real time as I'm playing. And let's see, I think I have 4 beat count in, so let's try that. So now you see, let's see if I can zoom in here. In that track that I had armed and selected here, I recorded that MIDI note data. And now, if I hit play, and I must have done the first note before the measure started, so So we'll start there. So I just did an overdub on top of that. One thing that's really cool about Cubasis is you can sort of layer MIDI parts on top of each other, which is really wild in my opinion. I've never seen that in a sort of in a workflow, but it opens up a lot of really cool options, and makes it really easy to double parts and stuff like that. But okay, so that's how you sort of record the part, and notice it's MIDI data. So I could change this instrument. And, you know, that's kind of neat. So the other thing I'll say about this workflow is that what I've done is created a performance to match this Cubasis project. You can, I don't know if there's a way to record program changes into Cubasis. I haven't looked into that. There probably is, given that Yamaha usually has pretty full MIDI implementation. But I would almost prefer just have performances sort of in each area, and then I don't have to worry about if I decide I want to change an instrument, I don't have to then go re-enter the MIDI data in the Cubasis project. It's just much easier to sort of maintain them two in the separate systems, but parallel, in my opinion. This way, I can also have this one setup in the MODX and open a new project in Cubasis and start working on the next track in this sort of sandbox and keep working that way. I also, when I set up this project, I saved a project as the MIDI composed template and went ahead and saved that separate, and then from here on out, whenever I save the project, I save it as, you know, some usually arbitrarily made up song name, but I save it as something different so that whenever I need to start a new composition, I don't have to go through and create all the tracks, the MIDI tracks again. Another thing I wanted to point out is that with this configuration, you can also overdub with instruments from inside Cubasis. For example, I have some drums in here. And basically, what I want to do is arm the internal instrument, which I did create a new MIDI instrument, and then I think I dragged it from here. No, it came pre-selected with the onboard sampler, and then I selected the vintage set. But basically, I can highlight any track I want. I just have to kind of turn the volume down, or I could turn local control off. Let me do that, actually. Because right now, if I play, it'll play the drums and the instrument that I have set up. So if I go to settings, and I think I can just do, where is it? Quick setup. Sorry, I'm just getting used to this MODX. I think it's MIDI record on DAW. There we go. So now I bypass the internal engine of the synthesizer. And I'm going to do a drum track over that super complicated part I just recorded. Oh, shoot. Better turn on the metronome. Okay, and so we could quantize that. It's a little sloppy, but I tend to like my drums a little bit on the janky side. So. Oh, and since I have it in MIDI control, if I want to go back to controlling my instruments, I need to put the quick setup back into standalone. So just to clarify, when I was in the home area and I decided I wanted to work on an internal instrument with the Cubasis setup, I armed that track, I disarmed any of the other MIDI tracks, and I went to settings and quick setup and just changed it from standalone to MIDI record on DAW. I'm going to put it back in standalone mode because I think I'd like to record like a counter melody or something. So let's go ahead and select that guy. Oops. And what is that, track 2? Oh yeah, this is a really messed up voice I made that I like a lot. on the pitch, but it's also got modulation happening to some of the tape stop effect to make it kind of sound like an old warbly tape or something like that. So note I've got track 2 armed and nothing else armed, right? Yeah, nothing else armed. And I have it on track 7. I could record this MIDI data, but it would end up, when I played it back, because I recorded it onto the track 2 whose routing data says channel 2, it would end up playing back on my channel 2 here. So when I go to record another part, I want to make sure to select the same number as the track that I have selected in MODX. So 7 and 7. It's a lot to keep track of, but it ends up being kind of nice for sort of upkeep and file management and stuff. Okay, so now that I have that highlighted, I'm going to arm this guy and remember to turn on my click this time. So let's go ahead and... some of the physical knob turning I did on the cutoff there. I don't think it sounds particularly good, but you can get an idea of what's going on here. So from there, I could move that note data into another instrument slot. Or any number of things. I could duplicate it. I could even layer it on top of that first part I did, which is kind of a cool thing with Cubasis. Where is it? Yeah. And you can hear that cutoff modification I did is also recorded in that track. So anyways, it's a pretty interesting workflow. I love the internal sequencers on the MOXF and the QI100, and I would love to see something like that in the MODX in the future. I don't know if that's something that Yamaha would ever consider for their firmware, but in the meantime, this is actually a really cool setup, I think. It's definitely, I would say, if you're okay with iOS devices and using those kind of in a musical context, this is a kind of a no-brainer. It's one cable to connect to your MODX, and then you've got a really nice touch interface and something that's been kind of optimized for this sort of mobile DAW usage, and then you can just sort of manage your patches on the MODX, which is something it really excels at, is setting up kind of scenes and that kind of thing. So hopefully this was helpful to anyone looking to add a MIDI brain to their MODX using maybe stuff you already have laying around. Hope this was helpful, and if you have any questions or comments, put it in the comments down below. And if you liked and want to subscribe, do that too. All right, thanks y'all.